In this lesson, we'll talk about singular-plural errors. First, we'll talk about what is a singular-plural error, and then discuss some special grammar rules, and finally, talk about how the SAT tries to hide the error. Now first, what is a singular-plural error? Singular-plural errors occur when components of a sentence don't agree in number, that is, whether or not they're singular or plural. Now there's three types of singular-plural error. First, we have subject-verb error. In a sentence, the subject of the sentence must agree with the verb. In this case, from the official SAT problem, we have many nations, and the United Nations itself has issued stamps that commemorate the 50th anniversary of the signing of the UN Charter. Now here, the subject is many nations, which is plural. But the verb is actually has issued, right? And that's singular. You would never say many nations has issued. That just sounds weird. So, and it's also wrong. And so therefore, this has issued needs to be changed to have issued. The second type of error, singular plural error, is noun-noun singular plural errors. Basically, a noun must correspond with in number to the noun that it relates to. In this case, we have George Thornton Emmis was one of a handful of ethnographers who committed their life to studying the Tiglit culture of the Northwest Coast. Now, ethnographers is plural, but how many lives do ethnographers have? Well, they have many lives because there's many of ethnographers. So why is their life singular? That's definitely wrong, because this is plural and this is singular. Therefore, nouns must correspond in number as well. The third type is pronoun antecedents. Pronouns must agree in number with the antecedent, what it's referring to. In this case, the pronoun is they, but the antecedent is a government agency. Now that doesn't make any sense because a government agency, there's a here, and then they is plural. So we talked about what is a singular plural error, and now let's talk about some special grammar rules. First, you have to remember that some pronouns are always singular, and others are always plural, and these are some tricky pronouns that might confuse you. For example, everybody. You would think that everybody might be plural, but it's actually singular. So let's take a look at some examples from the official SAT guide. For months, one of the most popular breakfast foods were selling for so little that people thought something was wrong. Okay? So, well, there's what should be the correct sentence? Well, there's a couple of errors here. First, were is referring to one. One is doing the being of were. This is plural. This is singular. That's an error. So that means this needs to be was. So that means we can be either B, D, or E. Now, the difference between B and D is that one is something were, the other is something was. Clearly, the answer should be something was because something was because something is singular, and so was needs to be corresponded with that something. Now, the other thing to note is that if you have a bunch of nouns and then they're joined with and, then they're plural. In this case, we have much of the success of Frank Capra and George Stevens as the director of motion pictures can be attributed to the technical work of talented film editors. Now, as a director, that's singular, but it's referring to Frank Capra and George Stevens, but that is plural. So this one, as the director, needs to be changed to as directors. So we talked about the special grammar rules, and now finally let's talk about how the SAT tries to trick you by hiding the error. First, it tries to stuff a lot of filler in between words. Now let's read this really long sentence. In the past, the small nation had been committed to self-managed socialism, a system under which the workers, rather than a state, owns most enterprises. Okay, well, in this case, if you just isolate the subject and the verb, right? Workers owns. Plural, singular. That's clearly wrong. It's obviously wrong, but they stuff a lot of stuff in between, and that's what makes it hard. The other problem is that frequently the SAT tries to trick you because if an underlying verb agrees with its closest noun, then it's probably wrong. For example, we have mastery of, in this case, we have the verb are, right? The are corresponds with techniques, or does it? So this is plural, that seems right, but instead, are actually corresponds to mastery of, and that's why it's wrong. And finally, the last way that SAT tries to trick you is that sometimes the subject is after the verb. Normally, you would have the subject to be before the verb, right? Like, here's the subject is the subject, is the verb, and then object is right over here. The subject is before the verb. But here, sometimes the subject is after the verb. Let's read the sentence. At the heart of the program, enthusiastically endorsed by the city's business association, is plans for refurbishing neighborhoods and for making low-interest mortgage available to young families. Now, normally, when you see this underlined verb is, you'd be like, okay, well, what's it referring to? You look beforehand, but note that it's actually plans. That is being. So this is singular, this is plural, that's wrong. Here's a trickier example. Although naturalists have identified 600 different forms of Korean snail, there is actually no more than 2 true species within this genus. Okay, well, this is really tricky, right? Because you think that the is corresponds with the snail or what, the forms or naturalist? No, there is. So there is, the subject of is usually afterwards. So in this case, is corresponds to species because species is. And species is plural, is a singular, therefore that's an error too. So to recap, we talked about what is a singular plural error. Basically, it must agree in number. We talked about some special grammar rules and some tricks of how the SAT hides the error. Singular plural errors are the most frequently taught on the SAT, accounting for almost 9% of all the problems, and it's important that you understand these well.